Hello, I'm Linda Heffernan, a behavioral scientist and executive leadership coach, and I'm also a cognitive behavioral hypnotherapist. I specialize in cognition, thinking, and behavior of excellent human leadership, you as a human being, and in stress management and resilience building for executives and high net worth individuals. So, this is my second video. As I mentioned in my first video, clients have often asked me to document my approach and my ideas so that they can understand the structure of how we are working and maybe repeat it, apply it to themselves as they move forward, but maybe use it as an approach with their teams or their family or their friends. So, voila, here we are. I've just spent majority of my day 6 hours coaching, and I reflected on what would be of value to you today from my coaching. I've actually recorded this twice already. The first time I forgot to connect the microphone and the sound was awful. The second time I forgot to press start on the video. So hopefully I'll have enough energy to do this again. This is going to be very straightforward, folks. No fluff, no frills, there's no aesthetics here. Okay, this is practical behavioral science. I want to bring value to you. There's no woo-woo in this, just the nitty-gritty of how thinking shapes our behavior and our identity. Today, we are looking at a basic structure of my approach. Most coaches, especially ICF coaches, will follow the structure of the GROW model. And I also have a framework that operates within the GROW structure. I want to talk about this framework. This is my cognitive behavioral approach to coaching, what it actually means in practice, and why I work the way I do. So if you have heard of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, you will know it's a well-established therapeutic approach. And yes, it's the foundation of my therapeutic approach. But how do I use that in coaching? Because coaching isn't therapy, okay? Two totally different modalities, and I do not mix the two, even though in my therapeutic practice I come in with a coach approach. The principles that I use in both modalities come from the same place: cognitive and behavioral, how you're thinking and how you're behaving. So let me explain how this works and why it matters for your development, both as a leader and as a human being. So at its core, my approach recognizes something fundamental. Your thinking drives your behavior. What you think shapes what you do. And the stories you tell yourself, the beliefs you hold, the language patterns that you use, these aren't just in your head, folks, okay? They are the operating system that determines how you show up as a leader. So when you come to me with a coaching challenge, the first thing I do is listen very actively and very attentively to what you're doing, as every coach does. Not just to what you're telling me about the situation, but to how you're thinking about it. I'm listening for cognition. When you're talking about your challenge, I'm listening for specific things in the cognitive behavioral and NLP approach. First, language patterns. The words you repeatedly use. I should. Big one for me. I'm sensitive to I should. A lot of thoughts around that, and I may just have to do a video on that. I must. I can't. I always. I never. They kind of fall into the second pattern I'm looking for, which is generalisations. Okay. Nobody listens to me. This always happens. I'm terrible at this. I am terrible at this. The third one, beliefs. Okay, you'll often hear your coach or coaches talking about limiting beliefs and empowering beliefs. Beliefs are so important, okay? They are the assumptions you're operating from. So this morning, for example, I heard beliefs such as, good leaders don't show vulnerability. There's a logical level to that, and there's an amygdala-driven level to that. The other one I heard that is applicable here is, if I'm not working evenings and weekends, I'm not committed enough. And that's from someone who's borderline burnout. There are emotional factors, the feelings, number 4, attached to your thinking. I'm listening and watching for frustration, fear, pressure, shame. I might ask you to name them. I might also notice joy, happiness, pride. I'm looking out for incongruencies, okay? When what you're saying doesn't quite match what you seem to believe. Big incongruency. And the values piece is also very important in coaching, when your stated values don't align with your actual behavior. Now, caveat, I'm not doing this to catch you out. Really important when I'm coaching, okay? That's not the objective. I'm doing it because these patterns are incredibly revealing, and they're going on at a sub-level, unconsciously, perhaps a lot. So I'm bringing them to your awareness because they are showing me how you are making sense of the world right now. And then I like to bring that to your attention and ask you to get curious about my observation. Now, it's only an observation. I make sure my clients know that. But it's an observation made on their language. It's their thoughts around that are actually important, not mine. So I like, as I mentioned earlier, to use real-world examples when I'm talking about any of my approaches. And that's why this will be a slightly longer video, because I'm going to talk about the what of the cognitive behavioral approach and the how, because that's really important. That's good behavioral science. So I'm going to introduce you to my client, whose story fits in very well here. And I'm going to call him James, because I listened to an interview with James Norton during my break. So James is a director who came to coaching and told me eventually, as we worked through things, I'm just not strategic enough. And as we initially talked, that phrase kept coming up. Every time we talked about his role, his leadership, his future aspirations, I'm not strategic enough. But there was something else that I noticed that's really important, and this is why I like to build a rapport and allow the client to talk in conversation a lot about their story. When James talked about his work, he would describe complex problems that he had solved. He would describe long-term initiatives that he designed, and he would spot patterns. He would talk about patterns that he had spotted across the organization. And you know, folks, I know many of you are listening and thinking, that's classic strategic thinking. And it is. But James, he just dismissed all of it. When people on his team would recognize him, and when I recognized him, his answer was often, well, that's just common sense, or anyone could have done that. He moved to dismissal. Refused recognition, moved to dismissal. Sabotage, okay? And in that, I was hearing a massive incongruency. His actual thinking and behavior demonstrated strategic capability. But his belief about himself, his belief was the complete opposite. So that belief was shaping everything. It shaped what projects he'd volunteer for, how he showed up in senior meetings, and concerningly, it was shaping what career moves he'd consider, because within this company, there was a 2-year trajectory in every role to your next role. You had to be prepared to have an understanding of that and to discuss that in your leadership development one-on-ones. So I had to approach this with James in the coach approach. Pamela Richard, Ian McDermott, fundamental trainers for me, coach approach. Once you notice something interesting in the thinking, I'll ask the questions. Not therapeutic questions. Okay, I'm not interested in your childhood. That's not coaching. Questions that help you become curious about your thinking. Of course, unless a childhood belief is still being held in the present and you identify it. But it's not generally where I go to in coaching, unless you go there. So the questions I probably came to James with initially were something around, James, what makes you believe that? I'm not strategic enough. Okay. When did you first start thinking this way? What does this thought mean to you right now? What would it look like if we reframed this differently? So they're coaching questions. I hope they're good coaching questions. I hope they're coaching questions. And they're designed to create awareness, to help you see your own thinking patterns and to open up new possibilities. So with James, then, we had gotten to the point of asking and discussing and hearing more. James, I asked him, what does strategic mean to you? Because he was showing evidence of great strategy and dismissing it. So, James, what does strategic mean to you? We need to get into the structure now. He said to me, it's someone who sees the big picture, someone who thinks 5 years ahead. And the important piece, someone who can connect dots across the business. And that's when I'm thankful for allowing conversation and exploration in sessions. Okay, not going into fix. Who's the person? Marcia Reynolds. Coach the person, not the problem. Tell me who you are and what's showing up for you. I was then able to ask him, James, when you solved that supply chain issue last quarter by redesigning the procurement process, was that not connecting dots across the business? Yeah, I suppose it was, but that felt obvious once I'd looked at the data. So, okay. When did you start believing you weren't strategic enough then, James? And that's when it emerged. 3 years ago, in his previous role, his boss had given him that feedback once in a performance review. One line. James needs to develop more strategic thinking. And he'd been carrying this ever since as an absolute truth, even though his current organization repeatedly praised his strategic thinking. Even though he'd been promoted twice, since that piece of feedback. And he'd been promoted specifically for his strategic capability. Now that one piece of feedback 3 years ago had become his operating belief. Okay? And because he believed it, he filtered everything through it. He'd discount his strategic wins as, with me and with team members, obvious or lucky. And sometimes he would, therefore, actually what he was doing was he was amplifying any moment of uncertainty as proof that he was right about himself. So once we identified that pattern, now we can work with it. Not by dismissing it. We don't dismiss, okay, or judge. That's silly or that makes no sense. We notice it with curiosity, but we examine whether it was still true. If it's still useful, if it's still accurate right now. Because cognition matters, folks, and there's a whole neuroscience on this. And I bring in that neuroscience and I educate it. I do psychoeducation for my clients on neuroscience. I ask them, of course, are you interested in that? Would you like to know a little bit about it? I think once one client said no. They were also very stuck in fixed thinking and did not want to be coached. They wanted maybe mentoring. Okay, I focus on cognition with neuroscience when the client wants it because of how your brain actually works. Okay, and this is why the cognition piece is important. Your brain is constantly creating meaning from experience. It's taking in information, filtering it through your existing beliefs and memories, and then creating a story about what's happening. Story. That story determines your emotional response, which then drives your behavior. And this is where the neuroscience of language and memory comes in, hippocampi. The way you talk to yourself, your internal narrative, shapes your neural pathways. And when you repeatedly think, I'm not good enough, you're confirming that neural pattern. When you practice thinking, I'm learning and developing, you're building a different pathway. So fixed, I'm not good enough, tell that to your unconscious, your subconscious mind, into the hippocampi. That's a belief. Fixed, growth, I'm learning and developing, new piece of language, new piece of information going in there. So you're building a different pathway, and that's really, really important. Your cognition isn't just background noise. It's the architecture of how you experience reality. So for James, every time he thought, I'm not strategic enough, he was strengthening that neural pathway. And his brain, being the efficient pattern matching machine that it is, started looking for evidence to confirm it. So, if you are recognizing this, yes, it's a confirmation bias in action. When he had a strategic insight, his brain dismissed it. That's obvious. When he felt uncertain about a complex decision, his brain flagged it. See, you're not strategic enough. That's what he had trained his brain to do. The belief was literally shaping what he paid attention to and how he interpreted his experience. And that's why cognition matters, and that's why I prefer to start there, or at least to get there at some point. I also use NLP, alongside my cognitive behavioural approaches, neurolinguistic program, and I've just started using a little bit of new code NLP. Exciting. And people have asked me, why do you combine these? How do they fit together? Because CBT is evidence-based, credible science. NLP, in some opinions, is not as evidence-based. I think it's a fantastic combination. When I was moving from therapeutic to coaching training, I wanted to find the coaching training that met closely with CBT, because that's how I understand the brain and thinking and resolution and problem solving. NLP was the closest to that for me. So, to me, they're actually natural partners. They come from the same fundamental understanding. Language shapes experience, and that we can work with the structure of thinking to create change. So cognitive behavioural gives us the framework. It helps us identify unhelpful thought patterns, examine beliefs, understand the connection between thinking, feeling, behaving. It's the what. What patterns are showing up? What needs to shift? NLP then gives us the tools. It's the how. How do we actually facilitate that shift? How do we work with language patterns? How do we help the brain create new associations? How do we access resourceful states? So what NLP brings into my coaching approach then is fundamentally the structure of subjective experience. It asks me, how are you creating your experience of reality right now? And if that experience isn't serving you well, how can we restructure it? And that's my understanding of it. So some of the tools from NLP that I use, and you will recognize these from my description of cognitive behavioral, is language patterns, listening for and working with the precise language that you use, not just what you say, but how you are saying it. So I'm looking at physicality, I'm looking at facial expressions, I'm listening for tone, I'm noticing your breath. Where is the sighing happening or the holding of breath? Then we reframe, We help you see the same situation from a different perspective. And that's not my perspective. I just come up with possible other perspectives or ask them to consider, what do you think might be another perspective here? That can change your neurological response to the situation just when you understand a potential other perspective, especially if you recognize it may be more accurate. Then anchoring, big NLP technique. I do a lot of visualization work for clients, especially when there's a confidence issue related to behavioral change or an anxiety issue related to a behavior or a cognition. So we will create a visualization that focus on the behavior, the thinking, the state that you do want. And we index on the memory of that, and we create an anchor. And then you have an association between specific states and specific triggers, so you can access resourceful states when you need them. And I'll probably need to do a video on that for it to make sense. But there's also great ones out there if you want to look them up. NLP anchoring. The new code NLP that I'm starting to bring in is more sophisticated in its approach to working with unconscious patterns and creating change at a deeper level. Little more elegant, little more respect for your whole system. So why do they combine well? Well, I think they're a beautiful combination. They complement each other. Cognitive behavioural is excellent at helping you become aware of your thinking patterns and understanding why they matter. It gives you insight and rational understanding. Neurolinguistic programming is excellent at facilitating the actual shift in those patterns. It gives you practical techniques to rewire the connections between thought, feeling, and behaviour. And together, I think, they create both understanding and transformation. So you don't just know intellectually that your thinking needs to change. Okay, you experience the change happening. With James, there was a transformation. Okay, the cognitive behavioral approach helped James to identify the belief, I'm not strategic enough. And then we were able to trace where it came from and recognize it wasn't currently accurate right now, and actually hadn't been for quite some time. He understood intellectually that he was filtering his experience through an outdated piece of feedback. But folks, understanding isn't the same as shifting. Okay, it's not the same as action. And that's where the NLP came in. We used reframing to help him see evidence of his strategic thinking that he had been filtering out. So instead of, that's just obvious, we reframed it as, and this was very powerful for him, I synthesize complex information quickly. That's strategic capability. And he wrote it down and he kept it on his desk, and it was part of his anchoring process. We worked with the language he used about himself. So changing I'm not strategic to I'm developing my strategic capability, it might sound to you like a small shift, but the language you use changes your neurological response. One closes down possibility, fixed. The others opens it up. Okay, growth. We then also used anchoring to create associations between his most confident memories of strategic moments and a simple physical gesture to go back into that memory. So when he felt that anxiety spike before a strategic conversation, he could now access his resourceful state more readily. We did a lot of breath work as well, and that was important. The combination meant he didn't just understand his pattern intellectually, he experienced a genuine shift in how he thought about himself and how he showed up. So there's the cognition. It's a lot of work, it's a big focus. Only then do I usually start moving toward behavior, and if the client is ready. Ultimately, leadership is about what you do. It's not just what you think. Okay? Keeping it in here and not externalizing it, it's ineffective. Behavior is the secondary aspect. It's what shows up as a result of your thinking, how you communicate, how you make decisions, how you respond under pressure, and how you lead your team. Sometimes clients will come to me with behavior as the initial challenge. This morning it was, I keep avoiding difficult conversations. I struggle to delegate. I've been told I'm micromanaging my team. That was a good one. I've thought about it, and I can see where that may be true. Okay, because it's been pointed out to me. Sometimes they come with somatic issues, predominantly my therapeutic practice, the physical manifestation of stress, tension, migraine, headaches, insomnia, IBS, exhaustion, constant feeling of being wired, in burn on, maybe indexing toward burnout. And I absolutely respect that starting point, okay? You drive the session, not me. If you're telling me you're struggling with behavior or stress, that's real and that matters, and we'll absolutely start working with that. But I will also get curious about the cognition beneath it, okay? Because that's what's happening in your brain. And this is really important for James's story, and I don't mean to challenge, criticize, or dismiss any other coach's approach, but James had already sought coaching on this. Okay, over a year ago, he'd sought coaching. And the coach, James present with anxiety, stress, I think it was shaking or heartbeat, something like that, and tension headaches. And the coach completely indexed on mindfulness approaches to the topical issue, the band-aid. Okay, the coach, from what James told me, didn't go into where I was going into the belief, the cognition. They broached it slightly, okay, but there was no depth to it. It's not my approach. I personally prefer a different approach, because there's something important happening in your brain when those somatic body behaviors show up. It's your sympathetic nervous system triggering those somatic experiences. That's connected to your amygdala, and that's your brain. So you need to get into the brain to understand this. For James, the brain pattern that was showing up was based on the belief, I'm not strategic enough. And that was what was driving his very specific behaviors. So in senior leadership meetings, he'd hold back on his ideas, okay, waiting for others to speak first. And when he did contribute, he'd often preface it with disclaimers such as, this might not be strategic enough, but, and then he would present his idea. And he wasn't recognizing if it was good, but I suspect the fact that it was taken on board meant that it was good. And he would sometimes say things like, because I got him to notice what he was saying in meetings, I'm probably missing the bigger picture here. So dismissive, okay? So he'd avoid putting himself forward for high visibility strategic projects, even though he wanted that work. So he's sabotaging himself. And he'd volunteer for operational roles instead. He didn't enjoy operational roles. He'd never been recognized for operations. He was being recognized by others for strategy. But operations felt safer, okay, and therefore he felt confident. When his CEO, and this was a big piece of information that he came to me with, a lot of the somatic issues, his CEO had asked for his perspective on a 5-year plan, a 5-year strategy. And James went away and spent, I think, about 10 days over preparing, working all hours, second-guessing himself, analysis paralysis, ignoring his family, which caused other problems. And he started to feel sick physically with anxiety and pretty chronic tension headaches, going into migraines at times. All of that behavior was being driven by cognition. The belief was creating the behavior. And yes, I did do some work on breath work. Okay? I did teach him breath work for managing things in the moment with an understanding of the parasympathetic response instigated by breath work. And we did look at mindfulness. Mindfulness can also include mindful language. Okay, it does not mean you have to sit in lotus position, and hum. Okay, that's not necessarily mindfulness, and it didn't help him at all. James started to notice the difference between reaction and response from my work, from the brain science work. So I did psychoeducation with James because he was happy to do it. I always check with my clients, are you happy to hear about this? Only one has said, no, I don't want to know the science. Eventually they came back and said to me, what were you saying about neuro something around this? Anyhow, so James looked at the science. Your behavior and your somatic responses, the physical stress symptoms, are secondary to what's happening in your brain. Specifically, they're driven by one of two systems. Really important to know your amygdala. Down in there, roughly. This is your reaction response. This is your threat detection system, and it was ignited and fired in James. When it perceives danger, it will react, okay? Whether that's a physical danger or a psychological threat like rejection, failure, or loss of status, it triggers a rapid automatic response. It's a fight, flight, or freeze response, and this happens fast. Okay, very fast, nanoseconds, beneath conscious awareness. It's a reaction, it's not a choice. So when you're operating from here, predominantly, as James was, your behavior is reactive. You will snap at your team, okay? You will avoid that difficult conversation, making difficult decisions. You will lie awake at 3 a.m. catastrophizing about work. Then there's the other response, which is more important, the prefrontal cortex response, and that's where I'm working into as much as possible in my approach. This is your thinking brain. It's slower, more deliberate, more conscious. It evaluates situations. It considers options. It makes reasoned choices. And when you're operating from here, your behavior is a response, intentional, considered, and vitally important, it's usually aligned with your values. So what was James doing? So when James's CEO would ask for his input on strategy, his amygdala would fire immediately. And that would ignite the sympathetic nervous system all over the parts of the body, heart racing, palms sweating, mind going blank, working towards a headache. His threat detection system had learned to associate strategic conversations with danger, and specifically the danger of being exposed as not strategic enough. That, folks, is a reaction. It's automatic, fast, and it's beneath conscious control. But when we explored the cognition behind that reaction, beneath that reaction, we found the belief driving it. And once he became aware of it, once he could recognize that his amygdala was reacting to an outdated belief rather than an actual threat, there was no saber-toothed tiger chasing him, he could start to interrupt the pattern. Interrupt the pattern. There's an element of enablement, of empowerment here. Empowerment, not enablement. So the next time the CEO asked for his strategic perspective, James, he still felt that initial spike of anxiety, okay? The amygdala doesn't just switch off, okay? And it shouldn't. We need that to detect actual danger. But now James could recognize it for what it was, and then he could engage his prefrontal cortex. He was able to say, I sense you, I feel you, I hear you. This is just my old pattern. I actually do have valuable strategic insight here. The CEO is asking because he values my thinking, not to test whether I'm good enough. And he did it with an anchor. Now that's the shift from reaction to response, from amygdala to prefrontal cortex. That is autonomic to intentional. Okay, so this approach is in synopsis. First, you combine your CB and your NLP. I'm going to listen. I'm going to actively listen to your thinking. I notice the patterns, beliefs, the language you use, both what you're saying and the structure of how you're saying it. Second, I ask the questions, the coaching questions that help you see your own thinking more clearly. It's not to analyze your past. It's to understand what's informing your present and what might be limiting your future. Okay? Then, what is it? Third, we will explore reframing. What would it look like if there was another perspective, if you thought about this differently? Using both CB and NLP techniques, we work on shifting the actual structure of your thinking, not just understanding it intellectually. And then, fourth, we look at behavior. What are you actually doing? What do you want to do differently? How do you bridge that gap? And all the time, whilst doing this, I may identify tools and techniques, some breath work, some mindfulness practices that could be helpful to support the change. Okay, they're not the primary tool. Throughout all of this, we're working with neuroscience. We're recognizing when you're in reaction mode versus response mode, and we're strengthening new neural pathways. We're building your capacity to lead consciously rather than reactively. So, how did that work out for James? What was his outcome? Okay, important to do an assessment. So I would say that at the end of our 6 months of coaching, James looked and felt and was thinking in a different way. Okay, he gave that in his feedback. He looked like himself in the best of his ability as he was showing up externally, but now the inner self was strong and competent and confident because it didn't have the limiting belief getting in the way. So we knew this because he'd put himself forward for a major strategic transformation project. Okay, he acted. He was doing very well. He was leading it confidently, getting great feedback. In senior meetings, he was now contributing his idea without disclaimers. And when the CEO next asked for his strategic input, and that was an important part of the new project he was on, he did feel the flicker of old anxiety, okay? Because that's the amygdala. But he could recognize it. He could breathe through it. He could anchor and access the resource state, his confident state. So also importantly, as an evidence-based piece of feedback for his development, now when people, including me, were able to say that's a really strategic way of looking at something, he said thank you instead of dismissing it. So I would say the cognition had shifted and then the behavior had followed. And he was leading at a level that had always been available to him. He'd just been thinking himself out of it. Now the other piece here was some of the somatic pieces, the headaches, the sweaty palms and so forth. They lessened a lot, but there was some more work needed to be done in this area. So we took a break from the coaching, and then James moved into my cognitive behavioural hypnotherapy practice for stress management for executives. And we looked at health coaching based approaches and complementary health approaches to how he would look at his stress and practically deal with the stress. And that was important too. The whole overall approach, that whole, I would say almost a 360 holistic approach, is very logical. None of my approach is mystical or abstract. It's all based on how your brain actually works and what we see in evidence, results, fMRIs. I would say it's a fluff-free, woo-woo-free, no unicorns promised, and no paillettes, no glitter on anything. It's practical, straightforward, it's raw. So your thinking creates your feelings influence your behavior, and your behavior creates your results. That's pretty much it. Also, if you want different results, then I will work backwards. I will look at your behavior. I will examine with you the feelings driving it, And then we will explore the thinking that's creating those feelings, but we get to the thinking every time. And that's cognitive behavioral coaching. It's systematic, it's evidence-based, and it's powerful. That was a lot. I hope you're still with me. If you are curious about how your thinking might be shaping your leadership or who you are as a person, a human, and if you do want to move away from reactive patterns to intentional responses, if you're ready to understand the cognition behind your behavior, well, that's what I do, folks. It's exactly what I do. This isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about understanding what's happening beneath the surface and giving you more choice about how you lead or show up as a human being, how you lead, how you live. If any of this resonates with you, please subscribe or connect with me. You can find my details down below, hopefully. My website is akaizenmind.com. My LinkedIn is Linda Heffernan, Linda with a Y, at Kaizenmind. That's it. Okay. Thank you for watching. Thank you for using your growth mindset by watching and prioritizing your thinking, your cognition, and your inner self. Next video probably will look at what a Kaizen mind means. Really look forward to sharing that with you. In the meantime, look after yourself.